Welcome to the Reggie McNeil Podcast, where we explore what it means to seek God's kingdom here on earth. Join us on our journey to become more aware of and encouraged by God's work in and around us.
Hey friends, I'm here with Godfrey Hubert, a friend of mine of about a decade, maybe a little longer, and he's currently living in Houston, Texas. But Godfrey, that's not where you started, is it? You started in another continent in your early days. Talk to us about that.
Sure. I like to say I'm from the deep south. I was born 5 miles from the Uruguay border in southern Brazil. My parents were immigrants from the Soviet Union, German Mennonites that
Wow.
ended up in Brazil in 1929 as infants, young children. And so that's where I grew up. And when I was born, they had sold their farm, entered mission work, and ended up as directors of an orphanage, two couples taking care of 77 children.
Wow.
And so I always also like to say that what shaped me is I lived the first 5 years of my life in an orphanage.
Wow. Well, now, how long did you, how old were you? I know you stayed and you moved around South America some. You were in, school at other places. So tell us a little bit about your growing up years.
Well, when I was 11 years old, my parents moved from Brazil to Quito, Ecuador, to work with HCJB, the worldwide Christian broadcasting radio station in shortwave. And at that point, my parents put me in an American school, and I only knew 3 words in English. But I was in middle school, and so I learned English and decided then that I was going to become an American. And so at the age of 18, when I graduated in Quito, my parents gave me $90 and said, "Go to America, son, find a college."
Wow. Well, you've improved your vocabulary. You're up to 20 words that I can count. So, you've come a long way. But go back just a minute to those years. You did even as a young man, you did some work with mission projects and evangelistic kinds of stuff in South America.
Well, I grew up extremely poor. By that, I mean, I was 10 years old before I saw my first indoor plumbing.
Wow.
I was 8 before I saw a refrigerator. Most importantly, I was 10 years old the first time I drank Pepsi. And I still remember how it fizzed up into my nostrils. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
But when I moved to Ecuador, the American school was a missionary school. And there are 330 students there. And at the age, 16, I was a junior in high school. My parents, let me put it this way. I came to start experiencing a call.
Yeah.
That I was here for more than just playing soccer and basketball.
Yeah.
So I joined a Christian service outreach team and eventually developed my own mission team that on weekends would go to different villages in Ecuador and play basketball and witness as athletes in action.
Cool.
That next summer, I put together an athletes in action team that toured Colombia for 3 weeks and played all kinds of schools, including the University of Cali in Colombia.
Wow.
Lost by 2 points.
Not that you remember, Right?
No, I don't forget certain statistics. I just don't remember.
Right.
I don't forget, actually.
Yeah.
And so we played 21 games in 14 days and found ways to share the gospel, talk about our faith at halftime and other times.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the folks that are listening to our podcast, it's not so much that I want them to, some of them, maybe many of them will have a sense of call, understanding that their life is supposed to mean more than, just taking up space and paying taxes and raising families and all that, that there's something they're here for. Some of them go into, church related, ministry related stuff like you did initially, and that's where you were when I met you. But a lot of our folks are going to just figure out ways to be, kingdom folks playing soccer and playing basketball and going to work every day. And actually, your journey has carried you back into a larger world in the church. But let's go back though before we get to that, and pick up. So you came to 90 with $90 in your pocket to the U.S. What year was that?
1971.
Wow. And you made your way through college and seminary and all that kind of stuff. Now you were a pastor of a pretty dynamic, vibrant church when I met you, pastoring a church in Northwest Houston. And so let's talk about what was your mind? What were you working on at that point when we intersected? There was something that was kind of troubling you.
Well, you're right. There was a certain amount of dissatisfaction. I suspect that everybody goes through this, as the book Halftime. I can't recall his name.
Yeah.
Wrote Halftime. You know the guy.
Bob Buchanan. Yeah, sure.
You know, the first half of life, you make a name for yourself and make a living, and then you start thinking about how can I influence the world, and so there was a degree of dissatisfaction. I hadn't been at my college in Kentucky 2 weeks back in '71 when I heard about this mission that needed a pastor, and I volunteered. And they said, well, it doesn't pay. I had no idea that it could pay. So we started with 3 little old ladies and 3 alcoholics. And
Oh, wow.
the first Easter, we had about 120 coming every Sunday, and we did VBS every afternoon. We had a food bank, a clothing bank. I visited in the jail, just having a grand old time.
Yeah.
Then I went to seminary and became a pastor, as you said, and I pastored 46 years, 3 different churches. The last one, Foundry Church in Houston, for 34 years. But I kind of sensed that I was really not doing what I was supposed to be doing. Specifically, I thought that my work really didn't look a whole lot like the work that Jesus did.
Wow.
And since I preached him and followed Jesus, I thought I should look a little bit more, our work should look a little more alike.
Wow. Oh, that's a tough, that's a nagging question when you're a pastor. I mean, we're the professionals, we're supposed to know all this stuff.
But that's part of the problem, is I'd become a professional.
Yeah.
Bought the whole idea that I was there to run a church, grow a church, and your success is measured by how many butts are in a seat and how many dollars on a plate.
Right. Very church centric. And I talk a lot about that, as you know. That kind of church centric thinking just has so many people on both sides of the podium, by the way. It has lay people in bondage thinking they have to, their whole Christian life is to be lived out in service as a committed church member. And that's where it really counts, and nothing else. That the rest of life is just kind of nice, but church is what really counts. And then on your side, so many pastors I talk to just feel trapped, and they realize that church has become an industry, and it was supposed to be a movement, and it wasn't even supposed to be about itself. It was supposed to point people somewhere else, but somewhere along the line, we begin to think it was about us.
Yeah, I remember you told me, Reggie, one time that the unfortunate thing about the church is that back in the late 70s and early 80s, when they're trying to trying to improve quality of their work, they turned to the service industry, namely Disney, for best practices. And so the church became a service industry.
Yeah, and we've become really good at creating customers. When our charge is to create disciples.
And I think the word you used at one time was spiritual consumers.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
We create, that's what advertising, I mean, everything is to create an appetite for something. And the appetite we created, I'm not sure was for the food that Jesus gives us. The appetite was for dessert.
Well, I remember you and I had some really great conversations back and forth, and out of that, your own development. One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you and allow this, this move or transformation in your own thinking to come out to our listeners was because where you've landed is just such a magnificent kingdom-centric orientation. And I want some of the folks that are listening to us to realize, just because you're in a church-centric paradigm doesn't mean you can't make the switch. You've got choices, and you can begin today to work your way out. So, but let me just be specific so our folks get an idea of what I'm talking about here. Let's talk about the development and a little bit of history and present day, then of what the foundation you started called CyHope.
Well, it was in 2010, after all those years, decades in doing church work, and really feeling that not doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I was bringing people in and nesting them in the church, not realizing that, and it was, and really back, when you go back to the very beginning, I mean, there's one thing God expected from us in the garden, in the story of the Garden of Eden. One thing is to care for each other.
Yeah.
And to care for his backyard.
Yeah.
And we have done a pretty lousy job as human beings and the church of taking care of each other or of God's backyard. And so I realized the most important part of ministry, so to speak, is not what is happening in the church, but how it translates into life-changing services in the world.
Yeah, exactly. That, God has, I talk about the kingdom as life. It's a kind of life that God envisions for all of us, the life that God intends, exactly like you're talking about there in the garden story. So CyHope was what was something that grew out of your intention then to begin to have that kind of impact beyond the church, but actually in God's backyard, in the community where you were. So tell us about it. It's a great story.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was on a sabbatical in Hawaii in 2010. 4 months, thought I would just sit and read and play a little golf. Told my staff they could each recommend a book to me. I never got past the first one, which was your book, The Present Future.
Yeah, I haven't either.
You asked a question in that book, if your church closed its doors tomorrow, would the community miss it?
Yeah.
And my 5,000 members would miss me, but I don't think the community would notice.
Huh.
And that was sobering. So
Yeah.
I actually tracked you down from Hawaii and found out that you're leading a missional renaissance thing, and insisted that I be a part of the next group, and I was.
Yeah,
and
great fun.
What you did is you led us through exercises to discover our purpose and to discover our mission. And since we live in the third largest school district of Texas, the largest suburban school district in the country, with 120,000 students, half of whom are at risk or on free and reduced leave. Even though we're a very affluent area of Houston, we realized, it's time for us to make the children because our entire region is known for the school district. We're not incorporated. We don't have a government. The school district is all we're known for. And so we said, well, maybe that's our calling, is the
and
school.
And that was Cy-Fair, right? Is the name of the
school district.
Which was the combining Cypress and Fair, into one.
Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has 13 high schools.
Wow.
Over 90 schools in total. And so we made it our mission to make life better for kids in CyFair.
Yeah.
And so that, once you know your mission, everything else is easy. If you've got the cojones to move on it.
Yeah.
Then it just takes a little courage and boldness. I've always said I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm probably the boldest.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes. And so we worked through what would it look like. We began to visit with our school district personnel, the leadership of the school district, and we learned that you can adopt schools. And so we adopted 2 elementary schools and really made a very quick impact. At the same time, we decided to open 2 Hope Centers for after-school care next to 6 Title I schools, and we teach life skill classes, homework help, recreation, and just give them a place to hang out because their parents are working 2, 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Their parents are absent because they're working so hard. And so we started making a complete transformation in some of these kids' lives because for the first time, somebody's paying attention to them.
Oh, I remember visiting one of those Hope Centers. If I can just, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You took me there. So school was out. It was in a mobile home community where nothing's mobile. I mean, everything's cemented in. But you guys had bought or leased or whatever one of the mobile homes. And it was, like I say, around 4 o'clock. The kids had already had a snack. There were about 11 adults helping with homework. There was going to be a dinner served that night and then a life skill class for the parents. I can't remember exactly what it was, but and on top of all that, what struck me is the whole operation was being run by a 19-year-old kid, who this girl who was just bright as the sun. You could just tell. And it's kind of interesting too, because millennials, unlike the generation you and I came from, with Bob's book, about, live your first half and success and then get significance. These millennials, they're not waiting they don't want to wait till they're successful to go. They want to go change the world right now. And so that kid was doing it right then. It was a wonderful afternoon with those kids.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, Reggie, but I work best with millennials.
Yeah.
Or millennial thinking. I think Jesus was a millennial, actually. If you look at and really analyze his life, he had no place to hang out, but he hung out, and no place to lay his head. Didn't have a dollar in his pocket, but he knew where the coffee shops were.
Yeah.
And he was about changing the world. And that's how my life started out with my Mennonite background. And so we now have, we kept building. We have 6 Hope Centers now that feed into a number of schools. We found out that you can partner with a school, the food bank, and provide the lunches. I mean, not lunches, but provide the backpack.
Right. The weekend food.
Weekend food. Yeah. And so we contacted school counselors, and we ended up in 71 schools providing backpack feeding program. About 1,500 a week that go out on Fridays, come back on Mondays.
Unbelievable. And about 6 pounds of food per bag, as I understand.
Right.
On average. Yeah.
And Larry Durker was somebody I baptized and was a member of my church, and he's the co-founder of CyHope. And so we said, well, let's do a sports initiative because that's important in my life. Being Brazilian, soccer kind of was something I thought I was going to do the rest of my life, but it went into a different direction. So we started a baseball program called Durker's Champs to provide opportunities for these disadvantaged kids to play sports. And so it's funny, one kid showed up one time and he knew that a church group he thought was providing it. So he came in a shirt and tie. His parents dressed him up because he thought he was coming to church.
Oh, my.
And so we had to introduce him to a baseball glove and a bat. We have a music initiative. We started a counseling center that now has 16 full-time counselors, helping especially with parenting skills and counseling kids. So these are some of the programs we started because we wanted to change the world. And importantly enough was when I pitched that to my church, I said, what are we doing out here? We were filling potholes. This is something else you brought to my attention at one time. Are you just filling potholes or building a bridge?
Yeah.
And so we decided that CyHope was going to be the bridge we build into the community. And so
it's just magnificent what's happened. How many volunteers?
I want credit for this one. We funded CyHope initially with $1 million in 3 years. First 3 years to give it traction.
Wow.
You got to put your money where your mouth is, and that money I could have used in other ways, but I thought this was most important.
Well, and about how many volunteers do you have a sense for what it takes to run CyHope in terms of human resources and volunteer hours?
Hundreds.
Yeah, I know. I remember being there one time, I think it was a Friday, and seeing that incredible food operation with cars lined up for, I don't know, half a mile or better, just waiting in line, coming in, popping the trunk, people stuffing and off you go. Something you told me, something like 85 cars or something it took to deliver the food all over.
Right. These weren't people coming to get food from themselves. These are volunteers filling their trunks with backpacks and taking them to the schools distributed. Fabulous story that I've always told, and it still makes me choke up whenever I do tell it. We heard from one of the school counselors on the effect this was having on the kids, and she told us about this one fifth grader who was very sullen, never spoke to unless spoken to by the teacher, and then he would respond in grunts and one syllable words mostly. And the counselor always suspected this kid was hungry. And so one day she called him in and she visited with him a second and finally said, would you take this piece of paper to your mom? And if she's interested, have her sign it and bring it back to me. And he said, what is it? And she said, oh, it's about the backpack feeding program. And she explained how it works, that every week, Friday, he gets a backpack full of food for the family of 4 and then brings it back. And he says, I don't believe it. Nobody's ever done anything for me. Why should anybody help me?
Wow.
He said, well, take it to your mother and let her make the decision. Well, he took it. And then on Monday, he came back and gave it back to her, brought the application back, signed. And he said, well, I still don't believe it, but what am I supposed to do? She said, go to the library Friday after school, and you're going to be number 2. Your backpack, look for backpack number 2. We don't put their names on it, so as to identify them. And he said, okay. Well, the librarian talks about what an impression he made when he walked in to get his backpack. And there were like 45 lined up against the wall. And he just, his eyes lit up. And for the first time, they saw him smile. And the librarian that was there, she told us about it. He ran and looked for number 2 and put his backpack on. And they're nondescript, so people don't know that they're in the program. And he went home.
Yeah.
On Monday, he came back to school with a white, plain old T-shirt on. And on it, on the front and back, was a huge number 2.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. Wow.
I mean, that chokes you up, doesn't it?
Oh, man.
Oh,
man. And
that's what it meant to him.
You're not just changing this kid. It has generational impact, because with the food, he can learn. When he can learn, he can get an education. His whole life is different. Well, we're having too much fun here. I want to ask you about something else. We don't have as long. But I mean, your work at CyHope is just tremendous. But more recently, you're now the executive director of HopeDisasterRecovery. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was 2019. It was 2017.
Earth to Godfrey.
It was 2017, and Hurricane Harvey hit.
Yeah.
Worst flood, and it was of biblical proportions.
Horrendous.
Yeah. 60 inches fell on the city of Houston and and about 60 surrounding counties. And the flooding was horrendous. And of course, my church did what it done. I mean, this was my 5th 500 years. This was a 1,000-year flood, but I'd already been through previously 4 500-year floods. And there's something doesn't.
You're a bad omen, bro. You take bad stuff.
Houston's got a magnet. This whole area. We're attracting disasters. But it was always the same thing. It's so heartwarming to see the spontaneous volunteers coming out of churches, and they're always the first ones out. And they just swarm into the communities, into their neighborhoods to help their neighbors. And it's fantastic. But it was always the same thing: confusion, chaos, and a good deal of frustration, because we'd get a phone call from somebody, hey, can you come muck and gut my house? And it was 4 o'clock, say, yes, we'll be there at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. We'd get a team together, we'd send them out, and they get there, and it was already done.
Wow.
And 2 other church groups are showing up at the same time. But then there were entire streets and neighborhoods that were left out.
Yeah.
And so I kind of liken the church response to a 5-year-old soccer game. It's very heartwarming to watch, very energetic, but not a whole lot of coordination or
Right.
communication going on. And so I was already in my succession plan at the church, and decided and talked to the bishop, why don't we speed that up? And I start Hope Disaster Recovery under CyHope, the subsidiary. And because it's silly that we have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a disaster.
Yeah.
Why not? We need a long-term disaster recovery organization here. And so we started it. We started with compassionate care, going door to door and just sharing compassion with people, relief and supplies. And then and mucking and gutting. Then we started moving into recovery. And it was slow at first because being a newbie, you can't get funding. And we got turned down initially, but finally the United Way gave us $75,000. And with that, we rebuilt 5 homes with volunteers for pre-disaster condition. And then we did a few more just with some church gifts. And then finally the Red Cross and the SBP, San Bernard Project, got J.J. Watt's money. They noticed us and they asked us to apply, and we ended up with getting about $1.3 million.
Nice.
And our goal was to rebuild 65 homes to pre-disaster condition with that. And we got busy, put on the staff, and we got to 65, and he said, can we get to 90? You bet. We're at 162 rebuilds from Harvey.
Way to go. Way to go.
With only 6 left, and our funding will be gone. But at the same time, UMCOR needed somebody to start a case management program in this area. And so our bishop, and they always work through the conferences, my bishop said he didn't want to be in that business because he didn't know anything about it. So they outsourced it to us. That was an $8.3 million contract from FEMA to do case management.
Wow.
To manage 1,800 cases. We ended up managing 2,200 cases, helping, in all, we helped over 6,000. The 22 that we advocated for, and advocated for over $18 million in direct assistance for them. So, we're just making, because, the people who really suffer from all these disasters are those that don't have anything or have very little. And they're the least and the left out. And so there is no work like disaster work. If you really want to help the most vulnerable, they're the ones that suffer the most.
Yeah.
So, and then Laura hit this last summer, and we developed a partnership with a Mennonite disaster group, and they were coming to Houston. I said, you know what? Newton County in Texas got hit pretty hard. How about you divert over there? And we've done 72 repairs there since, and funded them since November. So it's been kind of fun. And then the county called us just 2 weeks ago, or a week ago actually, and said, hey, we're looking for somebody to manage our rent assistance program in your area. Will you do it? And said, sure. So now we're getting ramped up for that, and getting ramped up for a vaccination facilitation program where we'll go into the most vulnerable communities, the technology deserts, to facilitate their vaccinations.
Well, I'm just always impressed with a fundamental rule, and that is when you prove helpful, resources begin to flow, but you got to prove yourself helpful, actually resourceful yourself, and it can't be about you. And in all of these cases, God's provided for your work to have such scale, but it all started with an individual conversion from, this is what my main business is, to deciding to lead people into the real business, which is partnering with God in his redemptive mission in the world and helping people. So
I had to move from the institutional being trapped in institutionalism and building institutions to actually building lives.
Well, and I like the word, and that's that's perfect, because it's about institutions. No institution survives forever, but people are forever. People are built to last, not businesses, not countries, not churches, not organizations. People are built to last. And I like your use of the word hope, not because you're trying to prey off of it, because you actually deliver hope. And in my estimation, you used it with CyHope, and you're using it with, your Hope Disaster Recovery. Hope is, to me, just an echo of the kingdom. Now, why do people have hope? I mean, why do we think things should be better than they are? Where does that idea come from? And I really think it comes from this idea that God has and has put in. It's like a homing device that pulls us toward Him, and His designs for us. And I just want to thank you for your faithfulness. I've been able to watch it. It's been fun to watch. You keep going. You're ever ready. I mean, you just gin stuff up and all the time, and it's been great. And I appreciate you taking time to share a little bit of it. How do people get hold of you, Godfrey, if they want to talk about any of this stuff that you and I've talked about?
Well, thank you for the little plug. Yeah, one of the things I've always told, I'm starting my third nonprofit now.
Yeah.
TXCDR.org, Texas Congregation Disaster Readiness, to bring coordination and communication and proper execution to disaster work. Godfrey.Hubert at HopeDisasterRecovery is one place. Check out also txcdr.org for the newest work that we're doing. It's kind of fun being a serial entrepreneur for Jesus.
Yeah, man.
Finding a need and meeting it.
You're viral kingdom agent, baby.
I just want you to know that I listen to you because when we've started each of these, the first thing I said to the board and to the staff is eventually every institution becomes about itself.
Yeah.
It's self-preservation, and that kills hope. And, you have to remain a movement and really fight as hard as you can this whole notion, this whole drive to preserve, because I have never started anything of consequence where somewhere along the way I didn't say, oh crap, why did I do that? Why did I bother? Because it gets hard.
Yeah.
And it gets scary, it gets frustrating, but you just keep going, and and then all of a sudden you have a breakthrough and you say, oh yeah, that's why I did it. And, but the thing I don't want to do is start something that becomes about existing.
Yeah.
We got to keep our mind on what the mission is, and the mission is never sustainability, although sustainability is important, but when it becomes the mission, it has ruined the mission.
Yeah, when self-survival replaces what you're delivering. Well, you're delivering hope there in Houston, and I hope through some of our folks that listen to you today, that hope will be amplified in lots more places. Thanks, Godfrey, for the time. Thanks for the work you're doing. Keep it up, bro.
Thank you, Reggie.